last movie, I discussed how to change the shape of an object on your page. Now here's one more way to change a shape, but here we're only going to be changing an object's corners. I'll select this image in the middle of the page, and I'll press Command 4 or Control 4 on Windows to zoom into 400% mode. And I'd like to change these to rounded corners. How would I make this rectangle a rounded corner rectangle? I'll choose from the Object menu, Corner Options. The Corner Options dialog box lets me change any kind of corner into one of these effects. See, bevel, all kinds of stuff, including rounded. Rounded is really the one that you're going to be using the most. Go ahead and play with the other ones, but we're just going to play with rounded right now. You can see that the size, the 1 pica size, is the radius of this rounded corner. If I increase the size by using the arrow keys, or I'll hold down the Shift key to increase in larger amounts, you change the radius of that corner. If I change the size value, just by using the arrow keys, let's say, or I can hold a Shift key to increment in larger amounts, you change the roundedness of the corners. Note that I can see what's going on here while the dialog box is open because I've turned on the Preview checkbox. Now there's two things that I want to point out about corner options. I'll click OK. The first is that when you use these corner options, these corner effects, InDesign does not actually add Bezier points onto your path. If I use the Direct Select tool, you can see that this corner is still out here. If I use the Direct Selection tool to drag this point over, you can see that the corner is actually here, but the effect makes it look like it's rounded over here. Let me undo that. The second thing I want to point out is this works on more than just frames. For example, if I use the Pen tool and draw some kind of big thick line over here, I'll make a line and I'll make this a little bit thicker, and then I'll change the color so that we can see it better. Now what happens if I use corner effects on this? Object, Corner Options, change this from none to rounded, and you can see that it actually makes a rounded corner even though this is not a frame, it's just a line. And you increase the size and the corner becomes more rounded. This is really handy if you want to make a nice smooth corner and you don't want to have to mess around with Bezier points and handles and all of that. Remember, corner option works on paths, image frames, text frames, anything. These kind of effects make it really easy to create great looking layouts fast and even better, update or edit them later. Whenever you have two or more objects that need to stay together on your page, consider grouping them. For example, I want this image and this text to always stay together. So I'm going to select the first with the selection tool and then shift click on the other so they're both selected, and then from the object menu I'll choose group. See this dashed line around them? That indicates that this is now a group. If I drag one, the other moves. If I drag the text frame, it moves again. Grouping objects is a great way to keep things together. For example, Command G or Control G will group that one. Command G or Control G will group this one. You can group all sorts of things, and you can even group multiple groups together. Command G or Control G on Windows will group all of these groups together into a single object, so they'll all move together. One thing I need to point out here is that all the objects in a group have to be on the same layer. So, unfortunately, you sometimes have to give up one form of organization, putting things on different layers, for a different form of organization, which is grouping. Right next to grouping in the object menu is another feature called Lock Position. It's pretty obvious what this does. It locks the position of this group, or this object. That means I can't accidentally move it. If I click and drag, nothing happens. If I click on one of these handles, nothing happens. It's locked. Note that InDesign locking does not work like Illustrators, where objects become non-selectable. I can still select this. Right, I'll select off of it, select on it again. But the benefit here is that you can quickly unlock a single object instead of having to unlock all the objects. To unlock this, I simply choose Unlock Position. Now, it's unlocked again. Locking the position is useful if I don't want to accidentally move it, but it does not make it uneditable, right? I can still select it. I could actually, even while it's locked, let's go ahead and lock it again. I could actually go in here and edit the text. I could edit this picture. It does not make it uneditable. That's an important thing to keep in mind. If you want it to be uneditable, if you don't even want to be able to select this object at all, then put it on a locked layer. As we saw in an earlier movie, objects on locked layers are not even selectable. Now, you don't have to lock or group your objects, but these features sure make it easier to lay out your projects faster. In the next movie, we'll take a look at how to get proper spacing between each of these objects again to make sure everything aligns properly. Whenever you have two or more objects on your page, you need to think about the relationship of those objects. Now, stacking order is one kind of relationship, that is, which is on top of the other. Another kind of relationship is alignment, or distributing objects on the page. For example, how do you make sure that all of these objects are aligned along their left edge? Just for the sake of the training here, I'm going to move these objects all over, willy-nilly, just for the sake of being able to put them back together again. Now, how do I do it? How do I get them back together? I could make sure that there's a guide there and then snap to it, but instead I'm going to use the Align features. The Align features show up in the Align panel. I'll go to Window, Object Layout, Align. By the way, if your screen is wide enough, you may see the Align features right up here in the Control panel. But on our screen, we don't see them, so we're going to use the Align panel. I'll select all of these objects, and then I could use the Align panel. Wait, there's something I need to know about this. How do I know which is going to move and which is going to stay still? Well, for left alignment, the leftmost object will stay still and everything else will move toward it. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to deselect that and move this over a little bit. Now I'm going to select all four of those and use a left alignment. You see how that worked? All three of these objects aligned to the leftmost object. If I were using right alignment, it's whatever's the rightmost object would stay still and the other ones would align to it. Same thing with the vertical alignment buttons up here. I want this background object and this image to align along their top. But I don't want the background image to move up. I want the top image to move down. So what am I going to do? Deselect all, Command-Shift-A or Control-Shift-A on Windows. I'll move this down manually, and then I'll select both of those and use top alignment. This I'll move up, and I'm holding on the Shift key, by the way, to make sure when I move that it stays in a vertical line. Now I'll select this, and I'll hit Align Bottom. I think you understand now about how these Align features work. Let's move on to Distribute. Distribute lets me make sure there's an even amount of space between objects on my page. In this case, I've got 3 images, and I want there to be an equal amount of space between the items. How do I do it? I'm going to use either Distribute Objects, or in this case, I'll use Distribute Spacing. Now, the Distribute Spacing button makes sure there's an equal amount of space between the objects, and you also have the option of using Use Spacing. This is usually turned off by default, so you turn it off and click on Distribute Spacing. You see that? It put an equal amount of space between each of the objects that was selected. Let me show you another use of Distribute Spacing. I'll go to the next page by pressing Shift Page Down, and I'm going to zoom in on this part of the page so we can see that we've got this image and this frame back here. I'll select both of those with the Selection tool by Shift-clicking. I'll left align them, and now I want there to be exactly 1 pica of space between these two objects. How do I do it? That's where Use Spacing comes in. Turn it on. I'm going to set this to 1 pica, and then click Distribute Spacing. Because I had Use Spacing turned on, InDesign knew to put 1 pica of space between these objects. If I set this to negative, now it says overlap them by 1 pica. If I want them to be perfectly aligned so there's no spacing at all, hit Distribute Spacing, and now there's 0 space between them. I love InDesign because it gives me incredibly precise control over every object on my page, which is exactly what I need to build high-quality documents.